In 1977, the golden sun beat down on a small California coastal town, a place where life usually moved at the slow, predictable pace of the tide, seemingly untouched by the wider world's turmoil. Yet a sudden shadow fell across its tranquil streets when a young policewoman, fresh out of the academy but full of quiet determination, vanished without a trace while on routine night patrol. Her name, once spoken with burgeoning pride by her family, became a whispered sorrow on the salt-laced wind. Everyone assumed the worst, that she had simply abandoned duty, seeking escape from the quiet confines of the town or the relentless pressures of her demanding, male-dominated job. Years bled into over a decade. 13 long years, and the mystery settled like fog over the cliffs she once patrolled. Until one crisp morning, a local fisherman, making his rounds, discovered something shocking at the base of a remote, jagged cliff face, a glint of metal beneath the shifting waves. Her rusty patrol car, swallowed by the Pacific years ago, emerged from the ocean's cold embrace, a tomb rising from the deep. Inside, evidence remarkably preserved by the salt water revealed a horrifying truth about that night, shattering the town's long-held assumptions and reopening a wound that had never truly healed. It spoke not of desertion, but of a struggle, of terror, and a fate far crueler than anyone had imagined, meeting on such a quiet night shift. Before we dive into her story, don't forget to subscribe if you believe bullies always get what they deserve. The salty air kissed her face as she guided the heavy patrol car down the familiar streets, the worn leather of the steering wheel warm under her hand. It was 1977, a year painted in shades of warm California gold, a time when this small coastal town felt both timeless and poised on the cusp of change, insulated yet vulnerable. The blue of her uniform felt cooler against her skin, a badge of honor she wore with fierce pride, a symbol of purpose in a world that often felt adrift. This was more than just a job. It was the hard-won fulfillment of a dream that had burned within her since she was a girl. Watching the police cars whiz by with urgent purpose, imagining herself inside, part of something vital. She longed to protect this quiet community, its sleepy storefronts that hummed with familiar lives, its friendly faces she knew by name, the stretch of golden beach where she'd spent countless afternoons dreaming of a life of significance, a life that mattered beyond the ordinary. But the world of law enforcement in '77 was unequivocally a man's world, built on old hierarchies and unspoken rules, and she felt the subtle, constant pushback like a cold undertow. The dismissive glances in the station house, the quiet jokes that stopped awkwardly when she entered the room, the ingrained doubt etched on the faces of some veteran colleagues who clearly questioned her place there, her capability, her very presence in the patrol car beside them. It didn't break her spirit. Instead, it fueled a quiet, determined fire in her gut. She would prove them wrong, not with arguments or defiance, but with competence, resilience, and unwavering dedication to the uniform she wore and the people she served. Her connection to the community wasn't just professional. It ran deep, woven into the very fabric of her own life lived within these few square miles. She knew the rhythm of their days and nights, the worried lines on Mrs. Gable's face behind the counter at the bakery, the boisterous laughter spilling from the local bar on a Friday night, the nervous energy of teenagers loitering near the pier, dreaming their own seaside dreams under the boardwalk lights. She felt an immense, almost personal responsibility for their safety, a weight that settled comfortably, purposefully on her young shoulders. A calling she answered willingly, patrolling along the waterfront as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and purple, transforming the ordinary into the breathtaking. She felt a profound sense of peace mixed with a familiar, low-grade anxiety inherent to the job, the constant awareness of the unseen risks. The ocean murmured its ancient secrets, vast and indifferent to the human dramas played out along its edge. The sound of the waves crashing against the rocks, a constant, hypnotic backdrop to the occasional crackle of her radio, a stark reminder of the raw, unpredictable nature of the world, just beyond the town's peaceful facade. She ran a hand over the smooth, cool wood of her steering wheel, a sudden, inexplicable shiver tracing its way down her spine, despite the mild evening air, a prickling sense of being watched. Ahead, the narrow road wound away from the comforting streetlights, climbing steeply towards the remote, windswept cliffs, a section of her late-night patrol route that always felt strangely isolated, cut off from the town's warmth and the reassuring sounds of life. A heavy knot tightened in her stomach, a faint, cold whisper of unease, suggesting that this particular night might hold something far more ominous than just routine calls. In 1977, a young policewoman from a small California coastal town disappeared without a trace while on routine night patrol. Everyone assumed she had simply abandoned duty and gone into hiding, until 13 years later, a fisherman discovered something shocking at the base of a remote cliff. Her rusty patrol car emerged from the waves, with evidence inside, revealing a horrifying truth about that night. Officer Miller, barely 3 years on the force, remembered the quiet hum of the radio, the smell of salt and old coffee in the cruiser. Her partner sighed beside her, looking out at the dark highway stretching ahead. "Anything?" he muttered, not expecting an answer. She shook her head, gripping the wheel, the familiar weight of the service pistol heavy on her hip. Was this it? Was this the life? She glanced at the dashboard clock, the green digital numbers a stark contrast to the vintage car. The night was still young. If you see someone being disrespected like this, like and tell us in the comments what you would do. Officer Miller steered the Ford slowly through the familiar grid of streets in her patrol zone, the engine a low rumble against the quiet sigh of the Pacific breeze filtering through the rolled-down window. This patch of town, a mix of aging beach bungalows and neat suburban ranches, was her domain. Every cracked sidewalk and porch light known to her like the back of her hand. She waved to old Mrs. Gable watering her roses, a warmth spreading through her chest. These were her people, her purpose. It wasn't just a job, it was a pact she'd made with herself, a silent promise to keep this small, comfortable world safe, even if it meant missing family dinners or lonely holidays. They sleep because I'm awake, she thought, a small, proud kernel of truth that sometimes felt heavier than her duty belt. The scent of night-blooming jasmine mixed with the faint, acrid smell of distant wood smoke. She saw kids skateboarding down the gentle slope of Elm Street, their laughter echoing, and a knot of worry tightened briefly before loosening. Just kids being kids, the kind of normal she protected. Yet, beneath the comforting veneer of routine, a subtle tension always lingered. She'd seen enough glimpses of the dark underbelly, the quiet desperation and hidden cruelties, to know that familiarity could be a cloak for unseen dangers. A flicker of movement caught her eye down a darkened alleyway off Main Street. Just a stray cat, perhaps, or something else. Her hand instinctively tightened on the steering wheel, her gaze sharpening, the mundane dissolving into a prickle of unease as the patrol car glided closer, its headlights cutting through the thick night air. The late afternoon sun, once a warm presence on her shoulders, began its swift descent, casting long, distorted shadows across the empty stretches of Highway 1. Patrol Officer Eleanor Vance watched the transformation from the driver's seat of her cruiser. The the familiar coastline blurring into shades of deep purple and gray as the light failed. The air cooled rapidly, carrying the sharper, saltier scent of the incoming tide, mingling with the faint, earthy smell of damp earth from the cliffs above. This was the hour she both anticipated and dreaded, the twilight shift, where the quiet predictability of day ceded to the unpredictable anonymity of night. She ran a hand over the worn leather of her gun belt, the weight of familiar comfort, a necessary burden. Out here, under the cloak of darkness, small towns like this one held their secrets close, and the ocean, always restless nearby, felt like a vast, indifferent witness. The sounds shifted too. The distant chatter of gulls gave way to the rhythmic crash and sigh of waves, punctuated by the mournful, lowing moan of the foghorn miles offshore. Streetlights along the sparsely populated roads flickered on, weak beacons against the encroaching black. Eleanor felt the familiar tightening in her gut, a knot of heightened awareness that always accompanied the transition. It wasn't fear, not exactly, but a sharp clarity, an understanding that the rules changed when the sun went down. Patrol became less about visibility and more about listening, feeling, trusting instincts honed over years on these lonely roads. Each shadow seemed deeper. Each rustle of wind in the dry coastal scrub sounded louder. She checked her rearview mirror, not out of paranoia, but out of a professional, ingrained habit, her own reflection pale and serious in the dim light. The quiet held a different quality now, charged with possibility, both benign and menacing. A lone car passed, heading south, its headlights cutting stark white paths through the gathering gloom, and she noted its make and color automatically. The world outside her windshield was contracting, becoming a series of illuminated fragments against an immense, listening darkness. She adjusted the radio dial, the low static a constant companion, waiting for the voice that would break the silence and direct her into the unknown night. She was cruising slowly along the coast road, the familiar rumble of the engine, a comforting presence in the quiet night. The dashboard lights cast a faint green glow across the worn leather of her steering wheel, reflecting faintly in her eyes. Patrol shifts often blurred into a gentle monotony, punctuated only by the squawk of the radio or the occasional passing vehicle. But tonight, something felt different. A subtle current of unease she couldn't shake. It wasn't the weather, calm and clear, nor the usual late-night revelers. Just a quiet, persistent hum of apprehension beneath the surface of the ordinary. Then the radio crackled to life, the dispatcher's voice sharp and hurried, cutting through the solitude. Unit 2 Alpha, respond to 1201 Point Crest Drive. Caller reports unusual activity. Advise caution. Unusual activity, standard code for anything from a rowdy party to something far worse. But the tone held a tremor that snagged her attention. Her grip tightened instinctively on the wheel, knuckles turning white under the dim light. 1201 Point Crest Drive wasn't a house. It was an old, isolated property overlooking the sea cliffs, mostly deserted now, used only occasionally by fishermen. A place she'd always felt a prickle of apprehension driving past, even in daylight, a relic brooding on the edge of town. A wave of cold dread washed over her, sharp and sudden, contradicting her training. Stay calm. Assess. Don't react. She forced a steadying breath, acknowledging the call crisply. 2 Alpha receiving, en route. Her mind raced, cycling through scenarios, none fitting the vague unusual activity description. Was it a trespasser, poachers, or something else entirely? The dispatcher added, their voice slightly lower now, a note of genuine concern creeping in. Caller was hesitant, mentioned sounds they couldn't identify. Disturbance seems to be emanating from the area near the old boathouse. The boathouse, down near the base of the cliffs, accessible only by a steep, overgrown track. A location shrouded in local rumors, whispers of strange lights and sounds over the years. The subtle unease solidified into a heavy weight in her chest. Her internal alarm bells, usually quiet observers, were now ringing insistently, a frantic clamor against her professional facade. She checked her service weapon, the weight familiar, reassuring, yet somehow insufficient against the formless dread now pooling in her gut. She flipped on her overhead lights, a silent, piercing beacon cutting into the absolute darkness ahead, the beam bouncing slightly on the uneven road. As she pressed the accelerator, turning the patrol car towards the winding ascent to the isolated property, the sea wind gusting harder against the windshield, she couldn't shake the feeling she was driving towards something she wouldn't be prepared for, a destination far more ominous than a simple noise complaint. The darkness outside seemed to press closer, vast and indifferent, amplifying the feeling of being utterly alone out here, and the rhythmic thump-thump of her tires on the asphalt became a nervous heartbeat counting down the distance to whatever waited for her in the shadows by the sea. The patrol car's tires crunched on loose gravel as it pulled to a stop near the dilapidated structure. Outside, the air bit with a damp chill, carrying the distant scent of salt and decay. Officer Ramirez stepped out, her breath pluming white in the dim glow of her headlights. The old cannery stood silent and skeletal against the bruised twilight sky, windows like vacant eyes staring out over the choppy water. A low, guttural murmur hung in the stillness. Not quite wind, not quite human. Her hand instinctively rested on the worn leather of her holster as she scanned the perimeter, her eyes wide, adjusting to the gloom. Two figures emerged from the deeper shadows by a collapsing pier, moving with a slow, deliberate pace that set the hairs on her arms on end. They weren't fishermen packing up late. They were gaunt, their faces obscured by the fading light and the dirt that seemed ingrained in their skin. A heavy silence fell as they stopped about 20 feet away, just outside the reach of her beams. She felt a prickle of fear, sharp and sudden, like static electricity across her skin. This wasn't a domestic dispute or a traffic stop. This felt ancient, unsettling. Her mind raced, assessing their stances, their empty hands. Or were they empty? The way they held themselves like coiled springs. "Evening," she called out, her voice steady despite the tremor in her gut. "Police, is everything all right here?" The figures remained silent, their eyes, she thought she saw them glint, fixed on her with an unnerving intensity. The air grew thick with unspoken questions, the weight of their gaze pressing down, a heavy, palpable force that tightened the knot in her stomach. A slow, almost imperceptible movement from the figure on the left, a slight shift of weight, a lowering of a shoulder, sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through her veins. This was not all right. Not all right at all. Her grip tightened on her flashlight, its weight suddenly comforting, and she took a small, calculated step back towards the open car door, the silence between them stretching taut, ready to snap. Brenda, hunched over the glowing console in the precinct's dispatch room, felt the familiar weight of the headset against her ear, yet something felt profoundly off about this night. The officer's voice, usually steady and clear, crackled through the receiver, strained and distant, punctuated by bursts of static that seemed to swallow crucial words. Officer Davis had reported a strange anomaly near the remote cliffs, something she couldn't quite identify, her tone laced with a tension that prickled the hairs on Brenda's arms. Brenda tried to clarify, her fingers hovering over the transmit button. But before she could speak, a jumble of hurried, almost panicked sounds erupted. A cry, a crash that sounded metallic and final, then nothing but the hiss of dead air. Brenda's breath caught in her throat. The standard background hum of the dispatch room faded as her focus narrowed entirely on the silence from Officer Davis's channel. She mashed the transmit button, yelling into the mic, her voice sharp with rising panic. "Davis! Officer Davis! Respond! Do you copy?" Only static answered. Louder now, a mocking roar in her ear. She scanned the digital map display. Davis's patrol car icon, a small blue square, flickered erratically for a second, then froze, nestled against the jagged line representing the coastline. It didn't move. It wouldn't move again. A cold dread seeped into Brenda's bones, settling heavy and absolute. It wasn't just that the signal was gone. It was how it had gone. So violently, so suddenly, leaving no room for explanation or recovery. The silent icon on her screen was a stark, chilling detail, a digital tombstone marking the point of no return. In that endless second of silence, surrounded by the mundane sounds of her job, Brenda knew with sickening certainty that something terrible had just happened. Something that had swallowed Officer Davis whole, leaving only that abrupt, deafening void in its wake. The frozen blue square glowed, a silent promise that the night's horrors were far from over. The worn static of the radio usually offered a comforting hum, a pulse of life connecting the precinct to the quiet streets outside. But tonight, that hum had died for Officer Miller's call sign. The dispatcher, a veteran named Betty with eyes tired from decades of watching clocks, tapped a manicured nail on the console, waiting past the expected check-in time. 5 minutes. 10. The standard procedure dictated a follow-up, a calm query into the void. Unit 7, check in. You copy? Her voice, normally crisp and professional, held a slight edge of impatience, a common annoyance when officers got distracted. Another 10 minutes crawled by, marked only by the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and the distant chatter of the few other officers finishing paperwork. The silence from Unit 7 wasn't just unusual. It was a growing absence that felt heavier than the ordinary night air. Betty tried again, her finger hovering over the mic button longer this time, her brow furrowing. The routine pleasantries were gone, replaced by a simple, urgent request. Unit 7, respond. Are you 10-8? The standard police code for in-service. The silence stretched, thick and absolute. A knot began to form in her stomach, cold and tight. She glanced across the room at the shift supervisor, a subtle shift in her posture signaling her unease. The low murmur of conversation died down as others began to notice the repeated, unanswered calls. The atmosphere in the precinct wasn't routine anymore. It was a sudden, sharp inhale, held breath, anticipation turning sour with dread. Betty's fingers flew across the console, checking frequencies, checking logs, a frantic energy replacing her earlier calm. This wasn't a missed check-in. This felt like a door slamming shut. The supervisor walked over, his face grim, seeing the panic bloom in Betty's eyes before she even voiced it. The radio remained stubbornly, terrifyingly silent. The mundane tasks of the night faded into irrelevance as a single, horrifying possibility began to dominate every thought. Miller was in trouble. The next steps would involve checking known locations, tracing her last reported position, but the lack of any response, the sheer, unbroken silence, painted a chilling picture that demanded an immediate, frantic search, a stark departure from the usual measured protocol. The radio crackled with panicked urgency, shattering the quiet routine of the night. When Officer Ramirez's patrol car didn't check in after her last known location near the treacherous coastal cliffs, the department snapped into immediate, desperate action. Sirens wailed briefly before being silenced, replaced by the thrum of engines and the pounding feet of searchers. Ground teams fanned out, officers joined by off-duty peers, reserve deputies, and quickly mobilized volunteers from the close-knit community. They swept through dense scrub and along rocky trails, flashlights' beams slicing nervously through the heavy darkness and swirling mist. Overhead, a helicopter's powerful spotlight cut wide, erratic circles, its rotors beating a relentless, anxious rhythm against the night. Along the shoreline, small fishing boats and Coast Guard cutters launched, scanning the choppy, cold waves, their searchlights bobbing erratically with the swell. Each missed radio call, each empty stretch of road or coastline tightened the knot of dread in their chests. Officer Miller, gripping his flashlight so hard his knuckles ached, remembered Ramirez's laugh just hours ago in the station break room. He kept scanning the ground, half expecting to see her walking towards him, annoyed but safe. The entire scare just a misunderstanding. The cold, damp air bit at their faces, carrying only the distant, mournful cry of gulls and the endless whisper of the surf. The collective hope, initially fierce and determined, began to fray with every fruitless hour. Every shadow looked like a form, every glint like metal, only to dissolve into disappointment. The emotional toll was palpable. Tired eyes searched frantically, voices grew hoarse from calling her name, and the silence that followed each shout was a heavy weight. As the first hint of gray began to stain the eastern sky, revealing nothing but empty land and indifferent sea below the searching eyes and sweeping lights, the grim realization settled. This was no simple lost contact. Something was terribly wrong, and the initial frantic search had yielded only terrifying, empty space. The initial shock, a raw wound tearing through the quiet coastal town, scabbed over but never truly healed as the years bled into decades. The police station, once buzzing with activity and hushed speculation, grew quieter. Patrol officers went about their duties, their routes occasionally crossing the familiar street where Officer Davies' patrol car had last been seen, but the urgency that had gripped them in those first frantic weeks evaporated. Files, thick with reports and dead-end leads, were moved from active desks to storage rooms, gathering dust like forgotten promises. The case, once the town's consuming focus, slowly, painfully went cold. For her family, the passage of time wasn't a balm. It was a relentless tide, eroding the edges of immediate pain, only to reveal the crushing weight of its permanence. Her mother still kept a small, worn photo on her nightstand, her fingers tracing the smiling face before sleep offered a fragile, often interrupted escape. At family gatherings, an empty chair at the table wasn't just a symbol. It was a gaping void that stole laughter and amplified the silence. Her closest friends learned to talk about her in hushed tones, sharing memories that felt increasingly distant, filtered through the ache of absence. They tried to move forward, built new lives, found new joys, but a part of them remained tethered to that damp, cold night, forever asking the silent question that had no answer. The town itself carried a collective memory, a shadow cast over its sunny disposition. The name Officer Davies was whispered, a cautionary tale, a tragic mystery that defined a specific era. The cliffs where search parties had once scrambled became a somber landmark, a place associated with loss and the chilling power of the unknown. The enduring mystery was a heavy cloak, suffocating the hope for resolution a little more with each passing year. It settled over the community, a shared burden of unresolved grief and questions echoing in the salty air. The possibility of finding her, once a burning ember, became a faint, flickering light, almost extinguished by the relentless march of time, leaving only the heavy silence of the vast, indifferent ocean and the waiting cliffs. The steel hull of the Sea Serpent cut through the pre-dawn gray, a tireless engine thrumming below decks. It was another Tuesday, or maybe Wednesday, the days blurring into a rhythm dictated by tide charts and the demanding pulse of the ocean. On the worn deck, Silas hauled on a rope, muscles straining against the weight of the trap rising from the frigid depths. Salt spray stung his eyes, a familiar burn that had etched lines into his face over 40 years of this life. Beside him, a younger deckhand grunted, hauling his own line, faces grim in the weak light. This was their world, the cold bite of the air, the slick feel of wet rope in calloused hands, the iodine tang of the sea mixed with diesel exhaust and the metallic scent of fish. Silas watched the horizon slowly bleed orange, a silent, vast canvas that held both bounty and an unnerving indifference. He thought of the thousands of times he'd watched this same sunrise, the endless cycle of setting traps and pulling them up, hoping the sea had been generous. It was a life tethered to the unpredictable, a constant gamble against currents and weather and the unseen movements of life beneath the waves. Sometimes, looking into the dark water, he felt a profound sense of mystery, a silent acknowledgement that the sea held secrets far deeper and stranger than anything on land. People talked about things lost to the water. Ships, cargo, even souls, swallowed whole by the vast gray expanse. He'd heard the old stories, the local whispers about the cop car that vanished years ago, though most folks figured she just drove off somewhere else. The sea kept its mouth shut tight about such things. They worked steadily, pulling in the day's first yield, the boat rocking gently. The air grew colder as a thick mist began to curl around them, swallowing the coastline. Silas felt a familiar low hum of unease the sea often brought on foggy mornings like this. Not fear, exactly, but a heightened awareness of the world's raw edges. Their usual run was almost finished, the crates filling up with the morning's catch. Silas wiped a hand across his brow, scanning the hazy distance. They needed to try a new spot today, somewhere less fished, maybe closer to the craggy, remote cliffs that marked the edge of the bay where the old stories sometimes lingered. The air felt heavy, charged with the unspoken weight of the deep water below, pulling them towards something unknown hidden in the mist near the ancient stones. The seafloor offered only yielding resistance, a familiar drag of mud and scattered debris, until suddenly the boat lurched with a violence that wasn't the typical snag of an undersea rock. A dead weight settled upon the rigging, not shifting, not sliding, but anchoring itself to the depths like a monstrous hand had reached up to hold them fast. On deck, Elias felt the deck shudder beneath his worn boots. A jolt that traveled up his spine and tightened the muscles in his arms, gripping the winching handle. His breath hitched. This wasn't a net full of rock or a drowned tree. It was heavy, heavier than anything they'd hauled in years, and strangely unyielding. A cold dread pricked at the edges of his mind. What tangled secret was the ocean refusing to give up? He squinted against the late afternoon glare, bouncing off the water, watching the thick rope strain, groaning under the unseen burden. The hydraulics whined, struggling against the immense pull from below. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool sea air. Every turn of the manual winch felt like lifting the world itself, the metal cool and slick under his trembling hands. Beside him, his crewmate muttered curses, his face etched with a mixture of confusion and raw effort. What was it? A wrecked piece of seabed structure? A sunken vessel? No, the drag felt wrong for that. Too concentrated, too dense. A wave of raw frustration, mixed with burgeoning fear, washed over Elias. Hours they had been out, the quiet rhythm of the fishing day abruptly shattered by this stubborn, silent presence. Each inch gained on the winch was a victory hard won, the strain echoing in the ache of his shoulders and the thumping of his heart. The curiosity gnawed at him, a sharp contrast to the sheer physical demand. What marvel or horror lay just below the murky surface, clinging with such desperate tenacity? He could almost feel its presence, cold and alien, resisting their pull. The ropes vibrated with tension, taut as guitar strings, threatening to snap. Slowly, painstakingly, something dark began to resolve in the water, far beneath the boat. A shape too regular, too sharp-edged to be natural seabed. The moment stretched, thick with anticipation and the raw physical struggle. The air heavy with the smell of salt and straining metal, hinting at the shocking truth, just moments from breaking the surface. The rusted mass, stubbornly heavy, clawed its way upward through the churning water. Barnacles clung to its surface like a grotesque second skin, and ropes of dark, slick seaweed draped across distorted metal. Below the choppy surface, it had been just an anomaly on the sonar, a significant obstruction. As it breached the air, water cascaded off its sides in a dirty torrent, revealing not just wreckage, but a distinct form. It was unmistakably a vehicle body, heavily corroded, its original color muted to a faded, grimy hue. A collective breath seemed to catch in the throats of the few observers gathered near the cliff base. Curiosity, the initial driver of the salvage attempt, curdled into a chilling recognition. The outline solidified as it was hoisted higher. A familiar, rounded shape to the roof, the unmistakable glint of what remained of a dome light mount. And then, through the years of accumulated grit and rust, a faded blue and white pattern became discernible on the side panel. The gravity of the scene intensified with terrifying speed. It wasn't just a submerged vehicle. This was a police car. The air grew thick with unspoken dread. The sound of the winch pulling, moments before a mechanical drone, now felt like the slow winding of fate. The sheer impossibility of it hung heavy. A patrol car at the base of these remote cliffs, submerged for what must have been years. Every face watching was a mask of shock, eyes wide with sudden, horrifying understanding. This wasn't a fishing mishap or discarded machinery. This was a piece of a forgotten, unsolved puzzle violently revealing itself. The rusted hulk, dripping salt water onto the rocks below, represented a profound violation, a dark secret torn from the ocean's grasp. It sat there, an undeniable, tragic monument, its presence screaming volumes without a sound. The quiet certainty settled in everyone present. This was the vehicle from that long-ago disappearance, the one everyone had assumed was simply driven away. The implications of its location, its condition, were immediate and devastating, forcing the stark realization that the truth about that night was far darker, far more final than anyone had ever imagined. The next step, approaching the barnacle-encrusted metal, felt heavy with the weight of history and the certainty of sorrow contained within. The air tasted of salt and decay as the winch groaned, slowly pulling the battered husk of the car from the jagged rocks. Silhouetted against the pale morning sky, figures in uniform moved with a somber efficiency. Word had spread like wildfire through the small coastal town's police department. A hushed, disbelieving current, carrying a name whispered only in solemn tones for over a decade. Officer Miller. Could it be? The vehicle was a rusted, barnacle-encrusted shell, its once proud blue and white livery faded to a ghostly smear. But the shape, the distinct lines of the old patrol cruiser, hammered a painful certainty into the hearts of the veteran officers present. Chief Brody, his face etched with years of unanswered questions, watched as detectives meticulously documented the scene, their gloved hands moving carefully over the warped metal. A VIN plate, miraculously legible despite the ravages of time and water, confirmed the unthinkable. Unit 714, Patricia Miller's car. A collective breath seemed to catch in the throats of the assembled officers. It wasn't just a car. It was the tomb of their missing colleague, found at the base of a cliff she patrolled so often. The silence was heavy, broken only by the distant cry of gulls and the rhythmic wash of waves against the shore, sounds that must have been the last she heard. This was the definitive, brutal answer to 13 years of agonizing uncertainty. It slammed into the department like a physical blow, dredging up memories of her easy smile, her dedication, the hollow feeling when she simply didn't check in that night. For her family, miles away, this discovery would shatter the fragile peace they had perhaps built, ripping open a wound that had never truly healed, yet offering, too, the first sliver of a path towards understanding the horror of that final night. The focus now inevitably shifted from the grim identification to the secrets held within the car's waterlogged interior, secrets that might finally explain what happened after she vanished into the darkness. The heavy winch groaned, battling the years of pressure and the stubborn grip of the ocean floor. Slowly, agonizingly, the patrol car broke the surface, dripping black water thick with silt and trailing strands of weed. The smell was immediate and potent. Decay, rust, and the cold brine of the deep. Investigators watched from the boat, a collective breath held tight in their chests. Seeing it like this, mangled and encrusted, brought a wave of profound sadness. A visceral connection to the final, terrifying moments of the officer whose life had ended within its metal shell. It looked less like a vehicle and more like a barnacle-covered tomb dragged from the abyss. They carefully secured it, lifting the sodden, heavy wreck onto a flatbed, the joints of the old chassis protesting with sickening pops. Back at the secure facility, under harsh, unforgiving lights, the true scale of the challenge became apparent. Mud, thick and clinging, coated everything. The interior was a ruin of collapsed foam, corroded metal, and unseen horrors lurking beneath layers of sediment. Detective Miller, his face etched with years of seeing the worst, knelt by the driver's door, a knot forming in his stomach. 13 years, he thought, the number a heavy weight. 13 years waiting for this. Hope, fragile but persistent, warred with the daunting reality of the decay. How could anything survive this? Each scrape of a tool against the rust was a calculated risk, a potential destruction of a vital, microscopic clue. They worked with excruciating patience, sifting through the muck like archaeologists unearthing a lost civilization. Every fragment of glass, every speck of unknown material, bagged and labeled. The air conditioning hummed, a sterile contrast to the organic decay emanating from the car. Hours bled into days, the silence broken only by the quiet clicks of cameras, the hushed instructions, and the scrape of brushes. Then, Buried deep beneath the collapsed dashboard padding, his hand brushed against something small, something that felt unnaturally smooth amidst the grit. He carefully extracted it, holding it up to the light. It was a button, small and metallic, but unlike any button from the uniform or the car itself, it felt distinctly foreign. His gaze lingered on the small object, a chilling certainty beginning to form. This wasn't just about how the car went in, but who might have put it there. A silent scream echoing across the years from the deep. The tiny button, seemingly insignificant, felt like the first solid step on a path they hadn't expected to take. In 1977, a young policewoman from a small California coastal town disappeared without a trace while on routine night patrol. Everyone assumed she had simply abandoned duty and gone into hiding, until 13 years later, a fisherman discovered something shocking at the base of a remote cliff. Her rusty patrol car emerged from the waves, with evidence inside revealing a horrifying truth about that night. Before we get started, don't forget to subscribe if you believe bullies always get what they deserve. The patrol car rested under the harsh inspection lights, a corroded hulk whispering secrets in the damp air of the garage. Its exterior told a violent story. Deep gouges raked its sides, not random scrapes, but deliberate crushing impacts concentrated near the driver's door and front quarter panel. The roof showed a distinct heavy indentation, suggesting a significant force had been applied from above before the vehicle was submerged. Inside, the decay was profound, yet the arrangement of what remained was chillingly clear. The driver's seatbelt was cut clean through, not torn or frayed by time, but small dark stain permeated the fabric near the steering wheel, too degraded for simple analysis, but undeniably consistent with trauma. Papers and equipment were not scattered by water currents as expected, but seemed deliberately shoved or damaged. The radio microphone dangled by its wire, its head smashed. Every detail pointed away from an accident or simple abandonment. It screamed struggle, restraint, a violent intervention. The position of the steering wheel, bent inward, combined with the severing of the belt, painted a grim picture. The officer had been attacked inside the car, likely incapacitated or killed right there. The final blow perhaps delivered with crushing force from outside before the vehicle was sent plunging into the dark water below. It wasn't just a missing person. It was a calculated act of violence. The car itself, a tomb, deliberately sealed. A cold, hard truth, rising from the depths to demand reckoning. The sheer brutality evident in the vehicle's state left no room for doubt, solidifying the terrifying knowledge that justice was not just delayed, but had been actively buried along with the patrol car. And someone in this quiet town had done the burying. The questions shifted now. No longer what happened, but who and why would do something so cruel and deliberate. The sterile hum of the evidence lab seemed louder now, a stark contrast to the ocean's roar that had surrendered the truth. Detective Miller watched the forensic team work around the battered patrol car, its metal shell a roadmap of a violent past. He ran a hand over the scarred vinyl seat where Officer Thompson had spent her final patrol, a ghost of a memory stirring, her laugh echoing in the precinct hall just hours before she vanished. The evidence emerging, piece by painstaking piece, a shattered headlight pattern, microscopic paint transfers, the angle of impact on the doorframe, wasn't just data. It was a narrative unfolding in brutal clarity. It painted a horrifying picture of a sudden, violent confrontation, a struggle, and a deliberate act that sent the vehicle plunging into the abyss. The initial confusion, The years of agonizing uncertainty for Sarah's family, the whispers of desertion, they all shattered like the car's safety glass under the weight of this stark reality. Miller felt a knot loosen in his chest that had tightened 20 years ago. Looking at the weary but resolute faces of the younger officers, he saw the same dawning comprehension, the quiet horror mixed with grim determination. The evidence didn't just explain what happened. It strongly pointed towards who was responsible, outlining a sequence of events that left no room for doubt. A quiet murmur spread through the room as the pieces locked into place. A shared breath, held for decades, finally exhaled. Tears welled in the eyes of one of Sarah's cousins, clutching a worn photograph, her gaze fixed on the ruined vehicle with a look of profound, heartbreaking understanding. This wasn't the neat, immediate justice everyone craved, but it was clarity, a solid foundation built on irrefutable facts dragged from the deep. The heavy weight of mystery was replaced by the steely resolve of a pursuit, the investigation shifting gears with a low, inexorable hum. The silence in the room wasn't resignation. It was the quiet before the storm of accountability finally broke. The journey from discovery to consequence had just begun, and the path forward, though fraught, was now undeniably clear. The quiet reverence settled over the small town like a sea fog, thick and still. After 13 years shrouded in whispers and assumptions, the truth, pulled from the cold depths, had finally spoken Officer Miller's name aloud. The discovery of her patrol car, the horrifying details it held, didn't just solve a mystery. It resurrected a life that had been unjustly buried under suspicion. People remembered her differently now. Not as the officer who had seemingly abandoned her post, but as a dedicated soul who had faced unimaginable terror alone in the dark. Her sacrifice, so long unseen, now shone brightly, a beacon against the shadow of doubt that had unfairly clung to her name. It was a quiet storm of grief and vindication that swept through the community. At the precinct, her photograph, once a source of uncomfortable silence, was placed front and center, flanked by flickering candles, a silent testament to her courage. Officers who had served with her spoke in hushed tones, recalling her steady gaze, her unwavering belief in justice, the way she always volunteered for the late shift. The discovery brought a profound, aching sense of closure to her family, lifting the crushing weight of not knowing, though the pain of her loss remained a constant ache. But intertwined with the sorrow was a fierce pride, a recognition that perseverance, even 13 years after the fact, could unearth the truth. Her story became a quiet legend, whispered not in fear, but in admiration, a reminder that some bonds, like the one between a community and those who protect it, could endure even the longest silence. The patrol car, once a symbol of her fate, became a relic of her resilience, a stark metallic memory pulled from the deep, speaking volumes about the night the town lost one of its own. A loss finally understood, finally honored. A chapter closed, yet a story just beginning its quiet, lasting echo. The days that followed the retrieval settled into a new rhythm for the town, marked by a quiet understanding. The initial shock had passed, leaving behind a dull, persistent ache that resonated through the streets. The ocean, which had held her secret for so long, now seemed to sigh with a weary indifference, its waves still breaking against the shore as if nothing had changed, yet everything had. There was no grand memorial service, no outpouring of public grief that sought catharsis in noise. Instead, the sorrow manifested in small, private ways. A single wilting flower left on the steps of the police station. A longer pause in conversation, when her name came up. The way people looked at each other with a shared knowledge of the fragility that lay beneath the everyday calm. The officers, their faces etched with a weariness that went beyond lack of sleep, moved through their shifts with a renewed, somber purpose. They carried the weight of her memory now, a heavy mantle that reminded them of the unseen dangers lurking in the periphery. There was a low-level hum of unresolved sadness. A distribution of unpleasant emotions spread thinly across the community, a recognition that while the truth had been found, it couldn't bring her back. The future stretched ahead, quiet and uncertain, a path illuminated only by the faint, distant light of understanding that had been so dearly bought.